Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a beer from a brand new to me brewer. This is from Common Space Brewery. They're based in Hawthorne, California, and this beer is called Chubby Unicorn Sparkle. It's a Milkshake IPA clocking in at 8% ABV. This one's been brewed with pink guava, raspberry, blood orange, prickly pear. Of course, Milkshake IPA has added lactose. In addition to all of that, it also has edible glitter. So this is the second beer I've ever had or reviewed that has edible glitter in it. I guess that's a thing. I haven't seen it a ton, but when I saw this one and saw the bill on it, I said, yeah, that actually sounds interesting. So aside from the glitter kind of aspect that might draw people in, it's got a really nice base beer to it. And the adjuncts and additives they put in here sound really, really nice to me. So first thing first, label art. This is a very sparkly label, and indeed it looks like a chubby unicorn, and it's sparkling. So aptly named Chubby Unicorn Sparkle. First beer I've ever had from this brewer. Let's get this cracked. While we're getting it cracked, in honor of my awesome Dachshund shirt here, here's a quick joke for you. Why did the cowboy get a dachshund? To get a long little doggy. Ha! You're welcome for that. At any rate, we've got our nice all-purpose Sam Adams glass. We're going to get this poured right in. All right. Pouring, pouring, pouring. Yeah, very nice looking color here. It's quite a bit darker than I anticipated for a Milkshake IPA, but it does look quite nice. True deep golden yellow. True deep golden yellow. Holding this up to the light, it's probably not going to be picked up on the camera very well, just due to the nature of that kind of classic golden yellow color. But there is absolutely a lot of my set lights, the LEDs, that is shining off of this glitter. It's very, very fine. I don't know if the camera will pick that up at all, but yep, there's definitely edible glitter in this. It's clearly quite thick. It is a Milkshake IPA, of course, but it was quite thick as I poured it, and looking in the glass, the effervescence is traveling very, very slowly. So I'm expecting this to have a pretty resistant mouthfeel to it, but it does look quite lovely in the glass. So with all these additives, let's get right over and give it a sniff. Okay. So kind of surprising. And it could be due to the thickness, but the aroma on this is not super pronounced. It's for all of the additives that they put in here. I'm not really getting a ton of information off of the nose on this beer. I'm smelling more hops than anything. It is an IPA after all, but it's got pink guava, raspberry, blood orange, prickly pear added into it. And I'm getting subtle hints that yes, there's some kind of fruit, but it's very nondescript. It's a very vague aroma. I couldn't say, oh yeah, that smells like that. That smells like that. Not at all. I'm really getting much more hop kind of notes coming through to my nose. And it smells kind of vegetal, as you would expect from a hop. And it's kind of muddling with these kind of fruits. So there's a little bit of a citrus aroma to it, a little bit of a floral, a little bit of an earthy. I'm not getting any pine notes or anything like that, but I mean, it smells nice. It's just not super pronounced. I expected with all the additives it would really jump out of the glass, but it does not. So I'm not entirely certain what to expect when I jump in for my first sip, but we're going to do that right now. Head has settled down, did its job, let the aromas come out that could. Let's just jump right in. Oh, wow, yeah. Okay. So despite the pungency on the nose, flavor profile comes through loud and clear. Yeah. There's a lot happening with this beer. Ton of additives. And I gotta say, as I'm sitting here thinking on it, you can really pick them out individually. So for me, this is an extremely well-balanced beer. The prickly pear is probably the most expensive ingredient in here, but it really pops out. So does the pink guava. Prickly pear doesn't have the most pungent flavor profile, especially if it's having to compete with other ingredients, but they definitely used enough you can really pick it out. It's got a very unique flavor, and it's quite nice. Pairs extremely well with the pink guava. The blood orange is a bit more subtle, but you can clearly get that citrus come through. And the raspberry really kind of comes through on the end. It tends to kind of blend with the pink guava and the prickly pear. That's what I'm getting with just kind of blood orange citrus notes coming through. Of course, there's lactose added. It is a Milkshake IPA. And this is not one that I would say is a sweet beer by any stretch. They clearly put the lactose in here to serve the purpose of not only, the thickening of the style, the milkshake, whole harkening back, but it also is much like the other additives. It's extremely, extremely well balanced. There is no suggestion of sweetness on this beer. It just lets the additive fruit ingredients pop out and actually taste like they should. So you don't have to guess. You're like, oh yeah, that's quite clearly pink guava. That's quite clearly prickly pear, blood orange, raspberry, respectively. It's very, very nicely done. So there was a lot of information to process there in the flavor profile. I'm going to jump back in for a second sip, get another kind of examination of this body and this mouthfeel, then we'll talk about the finish. But overall, very nice on sip one, very, very well balanced beer. Take two. Yeah, it's an 8% Milkshake IPA. There's definitely some resistance there. Thicker than your average 8% would be. The body's a bit heavier than your average would be, but this isn't top echelon in either. For 8%, it's definitely well above average, but it's not quite as weighty in particular as I would expect. The viscosity's not off by much, but it definitely has real presence to it. On the second sip, letting everything re-intensify, I'm getting exactly what I got on the first sip. So I really picked it out quite well. And the prickly pear and the pink guava in particular, they do kind of dominate the flavor profile, which is a really nice thing in my opinion. And then the blood orange and the raspberry kind of come in and do their thing in the background. The raspberry really does pair quite well with this pink guava and this prickly pear. I don't want to say it feels like it's binding to it or getting lost into it, because you can distinctly pick out the raspberry, but it's very much on the back end. The blood orange really pops out in the middle. It is that prickly pear and it is that pink guava that are the dominating flavors, which frankly, they go very well together. It's a very nice flavor profile through and through. In terms of how this beer finishes, this is a big Milkshake IPA. There's nothing dry about this at all. It's very thick, it's very wet, all the way to the end. And in terms of lingering flavors, how long does it actually last? Not just sensation of wet, dry. It's got it longer than I expected for a finish, considering it's not a very bitter forward IPA. It's a milkshake after all. But this one, it is really coming down to the pungency of the fruit purees that they added into this beer. That's what's driving out the flavor. And funny enough, despite the boldness of the flavors that come up front, what I'm left with that drives it out on the back end is 100% the blood orange and the raspberry. It's a combination of those two. The pink guava and the prickly pear get out of the way long before the end of the finish, but it is quite long actually for what it is. Definitely above average, very surprising. So in terms of aroma, I didn't know what to expect. It wasn't super pungent. It smelled fine, but the flavor profile absolutely nailed it. Beautifully balanced, a nice body, a nice mouthfeel, above average for what it is, certainly for the ABV range, and it finishes beautifully as well. This is not just a gimmick beer that has edible glitter added. That's just something extra they decided to do to it. This beer could stand alone on its own legs, without the addition of the glitter, but it's pretty cool that it's in there. Nonetheless, a very nice beer from a first time for me brewer. I'm going to take my time, sip on this one, comment my scores. When we come back, we will get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was Common Space Brewery's Chubby Unicorn Sparkle, a milkshake IPA clocking in at 8% ABV. Common Space Brewery is based in Hawthorne, California. The specific beer had a bunch of additives: pink guava puree, raspberry puree, blood orange puree, prickly pear puree, lactose, and edible glitter. So yeah, this was not another one of those gimmick glitter beers. In fact, the first edible glitter beer I had also wasn't gimmicky. it was just kind of an added interesting bonus. And this is only the second beer I've seen like this. I know it's a thing, but evidently it's not in a ton of beers. So when I saw it again, I said, you know what, let's grab it. This bill sounds really good. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed this beer. Always nice to jump into a beer from a new brewer. And I thought they did a great job. So we're gonna go straight through the scores. The aroma on this one, it wasn't super pronounced. Really, it was just kind of average ballpark. I could kind of sort of smell that it had this kind of fruity backside and a little bit of a hoppy aroma, even though it's a Milkshake IPA. So I really couldn't get a really big sense of what I was going to get into when I first got my first sip on this beer. But, you know, it is what it is. It smelled fine. It just wasn't super pungent. The aroma does get a 5 out of 10. For the taste, I really, really enjoyed this. All of the additives that they put in this beer worked really, really well together. With the guava and the prickly pear really coming big up front, they paired extremely well together. And then when it kind of backed off in the middle, you got the blood orange, finished off with that raspberry puree. And indeed, when we get to the finish, that's kind of where the driving home point was from. But overall, I thought it was fantastic. It was a really nice Milkshake IPA. Wasn't too sweet. They added lactose in balance, so it all tasted fantastic. What they added into the beer, you could really pick out, and none of it was really vying for attention with any other ingredient. The taste, I gave a 9 out of 10. For the body on this was absolutely perfect. For a Milkshake IPA, it's exactly as expected. It had some heft to it, only 8%, but it still had nice heft, and I give it a perfect 10 out of 10. The mouthfeel, this mirrored the body. Again, it's a Milkshake IPA. You expect it to be bigger, thicker, to have some presence. This one really, really did. The mouthfeel gets a 10 out of 10. For the finish on this beer surprised me. You don't often get on a Milkshake IPA, because of the lactose and it dialing back on the bitters, that you have flavors that really help kind of push out the length of the finish. But all of the additives that they had in this beer were really, really well selected and well done and in the right ratios. And really, the finish was well above average. And that's really where the raspberry came into its own, was on the backside. And that's what was driving it out on this beer. It was absolutely fantastic. Finish well above average. It gets an 8 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did a pretty good job. It was certainly above average, to be certain. It collapsed a little quicker than I would have anticipated, but it formed a really nice head. And it's just a shame that I couldn't get a ton of aromatic detail out of it, but it looked fantastic and it was nice and thick. Head and retention, above average, 8 out of 10. For the appearance, this was a nice, true, deep golden yellow. I actually didn't expect that, given all of the additive fruit that they put in here that obviously impart their own kind of color spectrum, but it was a nice, true, deep golden yellow. Appearance does get a 10 out of 10. For the balance, this was the big takeaway on this beer for me. Had a lot of ingredients, but it was well selected and the ratios were absolutely on the money. The balance gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, my subjective thoughts, I really enjoyed this beer. Only the second beer I've ever had with edible glitter. I picked this one up not because of the glitter, but because of actually the ingredients that they added to it. It was extremely well done. I absolutely love this one. Feeling in the intangible gets a 10 out of 10. Finally is an example of the style. So this beer did extremely well across the board in almost every category. The aroma was the only thing, and that wasn't bad. It just got average. It is what it is. But in the grand scheme, it got really great scores across the board. I think this is a really, really fine example of how you can take a bunch of different added ingredients and put into a beer base and do it right. It wouldn't matter if this were a different style than a Milkshake IPA, but the fact that it was, and the balance of the lactose and the additives and everything had its own voice, that's how to do it. Example of the style gets a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on Common Space Brewery's Chubby Unicorn Sparkle to an 89 out of 100. Well above average. Guys, this was just a great beer. I believe I got this from Tavour. There's a small chance that I got this from Craft Shack because I've only been using their service for a few months and I finally started keeping track of where I'm getting what, just so I can explain, hey, here's where I found it in case you're interested. But either way, check it out. See if you can find this in your local bottle shop. I don't know how big of distribution this brewer has. Obviously a brewery point in Hawthorne, but absolutely fantastic beer. I will be keeping my eyes out for more beers from Common Space Brewery to see if we can repeat history. This one was fantastic, and I do highly recommend it. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications, hit the bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.